All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our November Phoenix Forum speaker event series. This November one is entitled Storytelling the Universal Discipline, and it's presented by our UW Green Bay professors, Dr. Rebecca Meacham, Dr. Bill Salick, and Dr. Justin Kavli. My name is Brian Raymer. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at UW Green Bay, and also an alumnus in the class of '95. So before we begin, we just have a few housekeeping notes. First, please know that this is recorded and we will share it on the Phoenix Forum webpage of our UWGB website for others to listen to. Second, we'd like to have all attendees, certainly this is interactive, so please feel free to ask questions throughout by typing either in the chat box or in the Q&A section. Love to be able to have this be a two-way process, so as the presenters are speaking, if you have questions or things that you'd like to add to it, please do so. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can certainly email me directly. You should have my email address from when you registered, but it's raymerb@uwgb.edu. Otherwise, you can also send it to alumni.uwgb.edu or at uwgb.edu. So today's one-hour program will allow for about 15 to 20 minutes of question and answers at the end. Again, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box or the Q&A in the section of the team's portal here. So with that, we want to welcome our presenters. Again, our UWGB professors, Dr. Meacham, Dr. Salick, and Dr. Kavli. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as Brian mentioned, my name is Bill Salick. I teach in the music department here at UWGB. I'm also the audio production coordinator for Phoenix Studios, which is our on-campus podcasting arm. I was really excited to be invited to be part of this session because as soon as I started thinking about storytelling and all the ways I've been involved with storytelling and other art forms, just lots of connections started making themselves in my head right away. Sorry, one caveat: the screen there's going to be a video a little later. The screen that is being projected on in this room is over here, and it's also the live picture of us. And I found that I'm almost completely unable to stop glancing over there every few minutes. So if you see me glancing over there, it's not that this isn't completely engaging. It's that there's a little two-dimensional version of me over there that's constantly dragging my attention away. No, and you know, the more I thought about it, the more I thought about storytelling in relation to a lot of other time-based art forms that human beings have found meaningful for as long as we've existed in societies. And I'm not just talking about music, but I'm also talking about theater and dance. I thought a lot about a previous position that I held where I taught music in an academic theater and dance department. And so when I think about storytelling and all of these other fundamental humanistic activities, the common thread that I see, the thing that makes it universal, as it is in the title, one of the things that makes it universal is the fact that they all have to do with how we find comfort and joy in manipulating time. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that a little bit later after my colleagues introduce themselves.
I'll go ahead. So hi, I am Rebecca Meacham, and like my colleagues, I'm very excited to be joined by folks from other disciplines than mine, which is kind of entirely built around storytelling. I was hired as the fiction writer professor on our campus, and so most of my career is devoted to helping other people tell their stories, or different kinds of stories, according to certain conventions and standards and audience awareness. Some of the other things that I do on campus is teach students how to evaluate aesthetically whether a story or poem or artwork is good, and what good, and I'm doing ghost quotes if you can't see that on screen, meaning what we mean by that, and questioning our standards of goodness or greatness as we determine whether our work should end up, for example, in the journal that I advise, International Journal of the Arts, student run, Sheepshead Review. And more recently, I founded a press and publishing company on campus, the Teaching Press. And so in that capacity, I'm also trying to have regional authors and people who maybe never considered themselves to be authors tell the stories that they want to tell about the region or the water or cleanup or whatever is going on. So I'm really attracted to all sorts of stories. I'm also, the last part of this I'll say is that I'm also, as a literature professor, have always been, I guess, passionate about understanding and knowing about power as it relates to storytelling. So my academic area is African American literature and ethnic American literature. So I'm always interested in when the literary greats or the literary canon or certain kinds of storytelling is elevated, who's doing that and why, and what other types of stories or storytelling are not being elevated or are being devalued. So I'm very interested in power and storytelling. And also the last thing is how storytelling might save the world someday. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that. In fact, I know that. So it's nice to be with you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Justin Cavley. I'm in the communication faculty here at UWGB. I'm very excited to be here and talking about storytelling today. In relation to the universality of stories, a lot of what I do really focuses on the experience, really, and what the impact is and what we kind of take away from the experience of consuming, watching, viewing, listening to stories. And so what I do here is do a little bit of research in that. I teach some technology stuff. I came in to also teach video production. And so I have, I guess, like my hands in around in a lot of different areas of storytelling, which is kind of fun. And I guess the things that I really like to talk about regarding stories are really like, the specific experiences that we take away from it, like how we get engaged with it, and whether or not there are any possible universal patterns that are kind of commonly shared among people who, receive stories or consume them, and really kind of how we would define those traits and the things that we experience. So I'll just leave it at that. So, okay.
Do we have people joining us at this point that have questions?
No questions at this particular point in time. So,
okay.
Again, if you do have questions, please certainly try to utilize the chat box. We'd love to have those throughout the presentation. Or again, if you're having troubles trying to use the chat box or Q&A, you can certainly email me as well. Again, Rammer, R-A-M-M-E-R, B @ uwgb.edu. Thank you.
We have some humans.
I think we're in the wrong room.
Okay.
Okay, I apologize.
Not at all. Well, I can talk a little bit more about time.
Good.
So one of the big divisions, two categories of different kinds of work in the arts world are time-based media and non-time-based media. And that has to do with whether or not a piece of work has to use the passage of time as part of its presentation. So an example of a time-based piece of work would be a song, whereas a painting or a sculpture is not a time-based. Painting and sculpture are not time-based media. And again, the connections I'm making largely have to do with thinking about storytelling as one of these time-based media. So if you were to walk up to a painting and look at it for 5 seconds and decide that you liked it or didn't like it and then walked away, no one's ever going to, people may disagree with your assessment of it, but no one's ever going to accuse you of not having seen the painting. But if you walk into a film or listen to, say, a symphony by Beethoven, or go to a play and you stay in for 10 seconds, decide you don't like it and walk out, there kind of is this sense in which, well, you really haven't decided yet because you haven't invested all of the time necessary because the work is durational. It has a beginning and an end, and it does different things. It does different things throughout its, throughout its time span. And I think there's a basic sort of foundational human desire to understand time and to either manipulate time or feel like you can manipulate time. If you sort of cast yourself back to the very beginnings of human society, it gets light and it gets dark and we don't understand why. It gets hot and it gets cold and we don't understand why. And sometimes water falls from the sky and sometimes it doesn't. And so there's a way in which time is unpredictable and intimidating. And, if you want to talk about divisions between art and science, like if you're a scientist, your job is to try to explain what's actually going on with all these different things that change over time. But if you're an artist, it's about finding ways to create comfort and community and meaning by controlling what you can about time, by choosing a period of time with a beginning and an end and decorating it. And if you're a musician, you can decorate that span of time with sound. And if you're a dancer, you can decorate that time with the moving human body. If you're a theater artist, you can decorate that period of time with the reenactment of events. And if you're a storyteller, you can decorate that period of time by the relating of events. The thing that I think, one of the things that I think makes storytelling exceptionally powerful from a human and humanistic standpoint is that not only does the communal sharing of stories create that space where we have some kind of control over time, but the construction of a narrative, and this is where I'm at the very periphery of my disciplinary expertise and I'm completely trespassing on Dr. Meacham's, is that the creation of a story is fundamentally the description and relation of connections and causations between events. Yeah. And so they're a way of enjoying time now when we share them with each other. And they're also a way of making sense and making some kind of controlled order on, a series of events that happened in the past. And I think that makes them very, very useful for existing.
Ask you a question?
Yeah.
So what I'm intrigued by, because you are a percussionist, and I've seen my family and I enjoy always coming to see you do all the things you do, which are spectacular and widespread. So do you, in your practice or your field, feel like every piece of music or work that you're doing, which is time sensitive or whatever, do you feel they're all forms of storytelling, or do you there are certainly forms of writing where I'm like, that's not storytelling. That's just a certain kind of, like, there's certain poems that are meant to be like, look at that amazing, or here's an ode to this great person, or whatever. Here's an elegy. So do you feel there are certain storied or storyable performances and pieces that you've done? Even in percussion, which I think to me is a place where that's at the edge of my, I don't know that I would be able to know unless it's like, it sounds like rain, then it sounds like not rain, or, like what I mean? So how does that work in what you do?
I don't think that much about storytelling when I'm performing as a percussionist. Really? And I think that's just because music divorced from text. Like I can sing you a song that tells a story, but the words are telling the story. Right. And this kind of flies in the face of that very popular saying that music is a universal language. Like if music is a universal language, like music is also a really insufficient language. And so I think, and especially if I'm doing more experimental things, I think that the metaphor of decorating time with sound is a little bit more functional for me in that regard. Now that's not to say that within specific musical traditions, there aren't these kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? There aren't these kind of semiotic connections between certain kinds of sounds and certain emotions. Like
Right.
I can bring my hands down on piano keys in ways that sound happy,
Yeah.
or that sound sad,
You
or
can
that sound.
flip-flop like horses
Yeah.
in Christmas carols, right?
But one of the thing, you know, one of the things that I think we gain as music from this non-specificity that storytellers, I think, have to kind of engineer into their stories is that when I'm working with sound, I just feel like I'm creating just a rich sensory environment where people are free to have their own interpretive experiences.
Yes.
And you know, maybe that's my own rationalization for freeing myself from the responsibility of having to tell a story.
Right.
But when I'm being a percussionist or when I'm making a piece of music, I'm much happier to sort of put something out there that I find meaningful.
Yeah.
But communicating why I find it meaningful isn't as important as the audience enjoying it in whatever way they're going to enjoy it.
And see, this is going to lead into something I'd like to say, and then I definitely have to go to what things you're going to talk about, because you're talking about impact, right, and audience impact. But when I was thinking about, when you're saying creating a rich soundscape or air where people can kind of create their own story in that space, I think of the difference between writing on the page or text on the page versus any other type of modality with the same type of story, particularly adaptations, which is where people get really grumpy, is when, or very happy, when somebody takes something that's been on the page and then turns it into a movie. So most recently, one of the books I love to teach, and this is not like the most literary highfalutin, hello, I'm a professor and I'm going to lead with Stephen King, but one of the books I love to teach to my novel writing workshop, and this is a workshop in which my students write 50,000 word novel drafts. They're just about closing in on them, the end of them in about 10 weeks, so it's huge. And so I like to teach them, show them the first novels of like famous writers. So we do Carrie, and if you haven't experienced Carrie in any way, I'm not sure what I can even do. So like, it's just so iconic. There's the movie and there's Sissy Spacek version, and then there's this other thing. But the book is incredibly differently told than any type of version of the movie. And the version of the movie has to follow Carrie at whatever adaptation. This has been interpreted for you off the page and follows Carrie through being persecuted, which she is all the time, through all of these things that are going to happen. And then spoiler alert, she gets some revenge in a very profound way and the world blows up. Well, at least her town blows up and all this really bad stuff happens. In the book, the way that Stephen King wrote it, it's as a series of documents as well as fake documents. So someone who's done like the doctor so-and-so of telekinesis has like a little snippet here. And then there's an interview that's supposed to be in the future with somebody that was there. And then you'll have some stuff from Carrie's perspective. And you as the reader, and it's even more directive than a lot of types of things you read, you as the reader are putting it together. And you as the reader are like creating these pictures and you're doing all of this work. And it's really interesting to look at something where I think I tend to think on the written page, as a lot of people do, use so much more leeway to fill in those gaps or imagine what, this person looks like, or, or how they act in a particular way, versus when it's already interpreted for you, or there's already a story that's overlaid on that particular. So the real enemy is video. I'm just gonna flip it over to the story killer right here.
It's his fault.
It's his fault. He's ruining it. All right. Now, what did you want to say?
No, I think it's kind of fun that I actually love to comment on this like adaptation issue.
Yeah.
It's, a lot of times people always approach like the adaptation of books to movies with this idea of the immediate comparison.
Yes.
Whenever I've had that experience or that discussion with people, I always point to this idea that it's like it doesn't always carry with the same goals because there are obvious limitations with the technology itself. And so this is part of what I do too with thinking about how stories and technology fit together too, where video has a very purposeful one directional idea, that you are stuck in the reception of what the author's interpretation, or author in this vein would be the director of the film,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so you were stuck with that interpretation in that alone, basically. And you were not really able to imagine it beyond that.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about novels. But say you were to create that entire thing in a 360 video vein, like great carry it in the entire story of that, but you can look around and interpret and basically imagine it all happening in real time. No, I wouldn't either. You know, there are a lot of situations, a lot of stories I would never want to look behind me, you know?
No.
But then you can also like put into to interject your own ideas as to interpretation of it, and might actually make people probably enjoy that experience a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I think that like regardless of those situations, the goals really of the narrative of a video is different
Yes.
than it would be for novels, and there are also other things that we experience because of the reception of video and visual information that's just a little bit different too, you know. And so that's where you can experience like color and beauty and you know, have a story painted for you really beyond, other than having to kind of create it in your own mind. But that's my
Well, no, and I'm not ranking either, because if it came down to like The Shining, the book, and The Shining, the Kubrick film, I like both, and they are different, and they both entertain differently. But what you're saying about the goals of like a movie goes back to that time, the issue of time. You want to, if you're trying to be a considerate type of director, you're trying to have an ending to that moment, and it's, you know how long someone can sit in a theater. And, you're trying, unless you're doing it, there's some, what is the 10-hour, there's some 10-hour, like, movie or some type of entertainment, maybe it's a play, where you're being mindful of how you need to, where that like turning point, what you need to put at this exact minute or whatever, like you're being mindful of the consumption or the participation. Whereas novels are, what the best compliment you can give, or the best sort of standard you can reach as a review that you give as a reviewer is it's unputdownable. Because the idea is you're going to put it down, because you got to go live your life. You're going to take your kids to school or do whatever, and then you can pick it back up. And so it's not a time, you're not supposed to do it all in one sitting.
right.
But if you got it all in one sitting, it's a page turner, right? That's sort of be the best sort of, level of suspense or writing that you can do.
Right. Yeah.
We have question.
Did we?
So it comes from Nicole, says, hi, I work in the marketing world and folks are increasingly working with AI to write content. What implications do you think robot authored stories have? Do they reinforce power dynamics, for instance? Are robots coming for writers now too? Or what possibilities are there for using AI or artificial intelligence to make storytelling more powerful?
I actually talked about AI storytelling just last week.
Well, tell us about it, because like I haven't been made aware of our robot overlords quite yet. And all I know, I don't really even know to what degree like this is
capable.
This is
Yeah.
what's happening, because every time I see the sort of like I fed all this stuff into an AI,
Yeah.
and then it's like absurdity is what's publicized. So are they any good, these robots?
They're good for helping generate ideas, really.
How's it work?
Well,
Break it
the
down.
way what my understanding of it is in relation to cinema, and so I don't know specifically the capabilities of AI around music creation or novel writing or anything like that. But with cinema, they've attempted to use AI to write scripts, and that's short story scripts, and they did that. There was a competition called the 48-Hour Film Challenge that occurred, I think, in 2016, and a team from London submitted a script and did their movie based on an AI-produced script. The reception of it was incomprehensible. Dialogue made no sense. The stage direction basically put people at odds, and they have no idea what it was trying to say, and there were massive amounts of plot holes.
Yeah.
And then you know, there's a company called that's called OpenAI that created a AI image generator, kind of same concept where you input some keywords, it spits out, you know,
Those are fun.
images.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But the purpose behind those are really meant to just help, you know. And at this point, it's okay with kind of generating ideas and helping you to kind of like formulate possibly your own, but we still haven't gotten to the point with AI and AI development to actually have it be able to create meaningful and also logical content. And so that's still a ways off. And I don't actually think that it ever will get to that point, because I don't think that, well, one of the biggest issues around it is do we really want to or need to have an AI system that actually creates stories for itself?
Right.
You know, we don't, there's really no specific purpose for that other than, you know, major corporations being able to skim money from people that make movies or make novels. But at a certain point, you know, they're not anywhere near actually that good. And so do we really need to invest that much money into the development of it to be able to make the best AI create the best story when it's just not gonna for a while?
I'd like to make a connection between sort of this contemporary use of AI and some, oh gosh, I feel old saying some work from the previous century. But I really feel right now a connection between a lot of what's going on with AI and a lot of what John Cage did in the last century. A lot of John Cage's pieces are like the performer generates them from random number processes. And so basically you use some kind of random number generator to answer questions that Cage gives you in the score. So, you know, he'll say that a piece can have these sound sources and it must be 10 minutes long. And then, but then one of the first questions you ask is, well, how many sections does this piece have? 1, 2, 3, or 4? You throw the number and you find out how many sections your realization has. And then you throw numbers to find out how many minutes each section has, and then which instruments are going to go in which section. And I think like it's actually easier than you think to make compelling music that way if you ask high quality questions. And what that random number generation process does is it takes all of the portions of the composition process that Cage actually kind of doesn't care about and just kind of outsources them to a machine. And I think that it's pretty sensible to think of an AI as a weighted randomness engine. That you know, some kind of engine where like not every outcome is equally likely, but there's a range of possible outcomes. And you know, when I hear your story, what I hear is that I would have no problem outsourcing to an AI the parts of filmmaking that I don't think matter very much, but I don't think that plot is one of those. You know, I don't think that character development is one of those things. And so yeah, so it forces you to really decide, okay, what matters to me,
Right.
you know? And so in these pieces, you know, Cage doesn't care about the specific connections between the sounds. He's trying to find a way to scatter the sounds so you just hear them as sounds.
Right.
But he's very, very specific about other areas. And it really takes a lot of forethought and discipline on the composition side. And it really takes a lot of discipline on the performer side to really just go through the instructions as he gives them. And 9 times out of 10, what comes out is better, is satisfying in ways that were completely impossible to anticipate. Because the random numbers make these connections that you wouldn't have if you were going by your taste.
Yeah.
But it's got to be stuff that you don't care about.
So there's likely a situation with AI and AI produced material surrounding storytelling where AI could probably help alleviate writers'
Yeah.
by helping you to generate content ideas. But really, at the end of that, is AI going to be anything different than just like a random number generator? If it just tells you like a random, you know, story element, like, hey, AI, I need a character, and they say Tom and his he's an orc, then, or, and then you just run with it. And so at that point, I don't really know if AI is actually going to be, it's going to be to the level that we probably want it to be able to create character with setting that has motivation, that creates an event and then makes it more logical.
Right.
I'm optimistic that eventually it can.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you a really weird reason why I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because of SportsCenter.
Ah.
Why not?
Because, and again, whether it's SportsCenter, whether it's any one of these, sort of any one of these sports highlight shows, but structurally, that's what it is. It's all of these people
Right.
take it like a sports contest, a baseball game, a football game, a soccer game is basically a weighted random number. Like it's weighted like
Yes.
one team is good and one
Yes.
team is bad. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's likely to happen and one team's likely to win.
Yeah.
But when you watch those shows, they take like they take that the output of the game and they start constructing stories with it. And it was in the 6th inning when so and so woke up, and it was this moment
And
when
you
they
know about
decided
what
to.
happened to his dad before, when and then he has this wife at home that might be,
Yeah.
add in the difficulty, right?
Yeah. So if we've developed human activities
Yeah.
that serve, I mean, and again, like they're not just weighted random number generators, but they are that.
Right.
And if we've developed a highly nuanced, intricate, satisfying, popular means of taking that stuff and building stories out of it, then why shouldn't this eventually work?
I'm gonna swerve into two different directions, one of which I know really nothing about. But the first thing I want to say is about what we're talking about with AI is at the same time authorship. And it seems to me that every scenario we're talking about, ultimately, there is a human that's saying, here's what I'm giving you, here's what I'm inputting to you, here are your parameters, here's then what I want you to do. So the authorship, ultimately, if this is a question of, is the author gonna make it? Like I remember back in the last millennium myself, back a long time ago, the big question being about audiobooks. Oh, no, the death of print, right? And I was just like, come on, man. Books were the death of something else, right? Like literally having a codex or whatever. So those kinds of interventions, when I've done one of those AI like art generators, it's training me to input more successfully if I want to do Margot Tannenbaum in the Quick Trip, which is what I really was trying to have. Like, I was like, can I get this? Because my kids like, this movie and whatever. I had to keep figuring out how to tell the AI art generator how to do that better. So we were like collaborating, but ultimately it's the thing I wanted to see, right? So it was trying to come in response to me. The thing I know less about, talking about random number generators, is Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I don't do anything with this. My familiarity comes from Stranger Things, right? But I do know that there is no better random number generator than die that you throw, right? And that is an entirely storytelling game of an interaction that goes on of campaigns and stuff. So is that really any different than what we're talking about with maybe a button that we push or something that has a technology, which is different because we're still, as I understand Dungeons and Dragons, you throw it, you're changing the direction or the power or the whatever's going to happen next by virtue of that random number generator that you're working with.
Yeah, I mean.
Do I have it right? I don't.
No, yeah,
I look at you guys like, you might.
No.
I've never had, but that sounds right.
That's what I hear.
That sounds right.
But I'll say that like, technological interventions and technological disruptions will always have this effect. And I'm a musician. I don't think any of us think twice about the legitimacy of a piece of recorded music.
Yeah.
But if you go back a century and you look at and you recall like the sheer apoplexy with which sheet music publishers looked at new recordings and said, this is going to destroy the sheet music industry. Yes. It's going to make everybody stupid because you're going to be able to listen to music without having to learn how to play the piano. And so, I mean, like, I think we're just going to keep tripping over those cycles.
And look what happened. You got hippies and then it all went to hell. And rock and roll showed up.
I don't want to go too much further without showing Justin's video because we went to all this trouble.
Okay, so can I set it up a little? So one of the more recent interests that I've had and that apparently other people have had all this time, this is new to me, but not necessarily new to anybody else, is how we can use storytelling for social justice and for advocacy, and what more can we do? So I always teach a capstone, right now I'm teaching a capstone course, and I'm always like, let's try to figure out how storytelling can save the world. What more can we do besides enjoy telling a story or reading a story or think about how it's made in terms of writing and the kinds of courses I do? So I was throwing this out, and it turns out that Justin has done that very work through video. So we thought we might include that if you want to talk about what you want to
So, yeah, so the video that we're going to show really quick is a 5-6 minute piece that I produced last year in the fall in conjunction with the Press Times here in Green Bay. And they wanted to do an investigative piece on homelessness in the Green Bay area. And so they produced it, or helped me produce this video. So I did the video shooting and editing and everything, and then they did a lot of the interviewing and wrote the corresponding written piece with it. And so that's basically this. Yeah.
So you get this over here. Take a second to switch over, and then hopefully.
Summer, this has been the hub here at St. John's Park, and then November 1st, shelter opens, so it's kind of like, this is gonna be the last.
Hold on a second, I don't see it coming through. It's just delayed here, so my apologies. That's the issue.
This has been the hub here at St. John's Park, and then November 1st, shelter opens, so it's kind of like, this is gonna be the last day that people will be camping out here. At one point, we probably had up to 20 people this past weekend. They were pretty much shoulder to shoulder under the shelter here, which is open, and they just pile blankets up. They sleep on top of the blankets for insulation. They wrap themselves up in blankets and sleeping bags, so.
Probably one of the biggest definitions is people doubled up in a setting, in an apartment and a house, especially families. There's a number that are on the streets. A lot of times mental illness is involved.
One of the most visible things that they talked about in downtown neighborhoods was this impact of homelessness and why there was such a degree or amount of homelessness. Found that the things that impacted people were AODA issues. Most prominent were, alcoholism, which led to a chronic homeless condition. Now what we're finding is it's transcended to mental health. If we could solve mental health, we could probably solve a lot of their homeless circumstances as well.
When I came up from Florida and I was to live with a friend, things didn't work out the way they should have. And so I was in seek of the shelter, and it was one of the greatest experiences to grow. I suffer from bipolar, and with bipolar, I have a tendency to spend a little more than I should.
I have major depression. I was in service. I had an apartment, and I ended up meeting someone on Facebook, and I kind of jumped the gun, and just things just went wrong. And
I used to be addicted to crack cocaine. That was my addiction. Over the years of abusing it, my kid's mother finally said enough is enough. Became homeless. When I got here, I had a case named Matt. What I wanted to do was to have a place and be responsible for myself. And all he did was show, well, this is what you gotta do to get there. How I'm gonna get there? He gave me a bus pass. How I'm gonna budget? Got classes. I don't even didn't know too much about computers. We got a computer room. So it's like everything that they told me I needed to do to get to where I needed to get, they also supplied it. It was just up to me to want it.
Once an individual loses their job, loses their housing, many times people choose alcohol or drugs to medicate. There's also a lot of individuals out there who have untreated issues.
that may be bipolar. And that's where I try to use the phrase people finding themselves homeless or experiencing homelessness, because it's not a permanent situation, it's a temporary situation. And I think that's what our community needs to understand too. There's not the homeless, this big group of people. It's individuals experiencing homelessness for one reason or another.
I actually left an abusive situation with me and my kids. It was hard.
I have mental illness, I'm bipolar. And like I said, when you like physically just that kind of pain, you don't want to be around people.
I had a ex-girlfriend that decided that she was gonna quit her job and use all the rent money on drugs. We were arguing about it one day and she decided that she was gonna call the police, said that she feared for her life, that I was suicidal. Police came, took me away. I sat in jail for a little while. When I came home from her being gone, and nothing. She got rid of it.
Everybody's in a different position when they first get here. So you have domestic violence, you have people who are working and they're doing everything right and maybe making $12 an hour. We have somebody who is renting a house that the landlord sold to somebody else, and the new landlord said, I'm not going to renew your lease because I want to remodel it and then I can charge more for rent, which makes business sense. But what it does is it takes another affordable housing option off the market.
What happens is individuals are ready to leave here successfully, and there's no housing, no affordable housing for them. I would love to have this room filled with landlords, especially of larger properties, and dispel any stereotypes they have.
You know, people on the outside that don't know what people go through that's at homeless shelters. Some people be so quick to judge, but you don't know everybody's story. At some point, anything could be taken away from you in the blink of an eye.
It's unfortunate. In the last 7 years, we've lost a total of 7 people on the street. The last 2 were suicides. One of them, she was the first one to contact us at homeless outreach team. Couldn't access services, and a year later, she committed suicide after being homeless. So it was unfortunate. It sucks.
You know, as a community or as a provider of services, we need to figure out how we're going to help those individuals who have fallen through the cracks, the chronically homeless, the severely mentally ill, and those with great medical challenges. We've got to figure out what we're going to do to help those people. And like I said, it sounds like an assisted living setting. So if it is, well, let's do it, because what an accomplishment that would be for Green Bay, Wisconsin, to bring our homeless population, those on the streets, down to next to nothing. How awesome would that be? And how awesome would that be for those people?
Walmart's Black Friday deals for days every Monday is a huge deal. Get a $25 Disney Princess doll with.
It wouldn't be YouTube if it didn't try to sell you something.
I know, right? Look at all we've been through. There we are.
All right, sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully everyone caught that. I had a little challenge to begin with, but thank you for sharing that video. So I'll turn it back over and let you be able to discuss.
So I would like to ask Justin a question.
Yeah.
So that's an incredibly moving video. And, you know, I think so many times when you're trying to raise awareness of a cause which people don't want to pay attention to, or is around them so often that they don't see it anymore, like a person who is unhoused. I feel like, you know, you can read articles, you can take in the information, but what I found so moving and compelling about this was the fact that it was the video. And to me anyway, as I'm watching it, I'm hearing the voices of people who it's, you can build up all these stereotypes about like, well, they're immoral or they've done something to get there, but they're like, well, I'm bipolar and so I spend too much. And it's just very, they're very down to earth about like this type of thing led to this type of thing. Here I am. And they're so varied. So I guess what I wanted to ask you, there's actually a question. There's another comment, I promise. I'm not just going to praise you. But my question is, how do you, I know your area of study and scholarship is impact and on psychological impact. What have you noticed about video's ability to create impact, like either versus other types of storytelling modality or around kinds of issues? Like, how have you seen that?
Well, I think it comes down to how these types of visual formats really make it feel more real. Really, that's the biggest part of it, because with novel and the written word, you can create the world within your mind. You can imagine it. You feel like you're being transported into it and engaged with it. It's a lot of these really great feelings and experiences. But it's still your imagination. It's still some sort of simulacrum, some sort of simulation that we're experiencing. But then as soon as you get it on video or in any type of visual format, it becomes a reality in much more in something that you really you understand as not just being something that's a simulation, and it's an actual representation. It's an actual person that's an experience, and in that way, then it becomes something that's not imagination, something that you do experience. And there was a study that I like to talk about every so often. There was a really great researcher out of Penn State who I was able to get to know a little bit a few years ago, and he did a study with some of his grad students a few years ago where they put a 360 video camera on a boat in the middle of, I think it was the Havana or something like that. It was somewhere in Africa, I can't remember, but it was basically a hurricane ravaged area. They put this 360 camera on there, sent it out to a bunch of people, said, do you feel anything for these people, and do you want to donate or have help them out in any way? And it was an overwhelming yes, because the simple fact that you actually can experience that visually and turn your head, suddenly it made it feel real for everybody. And so the idea is like video and other visual formats make it feel more like you're actually there with them. I think that's one of the biggest parts that make it so impactful. So
I was going to say, tying this to the question you asked me earlier, where I said, oh, it's so wonderful as an artist to be able to create these rich, ambiguous environments and let you take it how you want. The problem in some areas is that, if I have a lot of interpretive options, as an audience member, I'm always free to choose the options that make me comfortable, the options that confirm my priors, the options that reinforce things that I already believe. And so in a setting like this, I think the fact that video, I don't get to choose the images are there, I don't get to choose that. The fact that all of those interpretive possibilities get collapsed down to one is a way to make me, attend to something that's really, really important. So all of these things are double-edged trade-offs.
And I think too, the fact that you paradoxically what's so great about this video is it's a compilation, it's a collage, it's put together such that I think we're so used to learning about things that make us here, the royal we sitting here in privilege in this panel at a university or whatever, uncomfortable, is we're used to the real didactic, like you need to do something and look at this, and there's a real like finger pointing didactic, someone's interpreting and then telling us how to feel and telling us what we should do, versus this format, which is testimonial, first person. And none of them are saying, they're not telling the audience to do anything. They are just talking about what it is that brought them in this spot or how this is working for them. And there's such, like, the way that it's put together with the smaller clips and so forth. It reminds me a lot, one of the ways I start my storytelling Saves the World class is with Brandon Stanton and Humans of New York. If you've seen that, very much it was a Facebook phenomenon. And he's a photographer. And then he would do the first person stories, but it wasn't him narrating. It was their quotes of the person being photographed. And I actually have my students study a number of these in a series or whatever and say, well, okay, let's really look at how is he getting you to feel compassionate? How is he doing this? And they have to sit there and say, well, their eyes aren't necessarily facing the camera, or the things that they're talking about are so mundane, right? And they're like really examining the rhetoric of it as well. It's really interesting then what I think at least we here and the types of people that I'm talking about teaching this to, and fans of Brandon Stanton are moved to do, is because you really feel you're absorbing that story. You really feel like it's being told to you in a way that you're equal with that listener, or they're bringing you in and you're, geez, I really want to help, or that's a really hard thing to go through. Right. So that accessibility issue and someone not being up there, and like you're saying, like Bill, like there's not, but there aren't many other options. You can't really look away. It's like right there in front of you.
Yeah. In some ways, if we think, if you accept my premise from way earlier, that stories are about ways that we take sequences of events and imply causation, and we're talking about the ability of storytelling to change the world, then maybe one way to frame any discussion about politics is a discussion about competitive storytelling. Because what's really happening is one person says, well, this happened and then this happened,
yep,
and this is what caused it. I want to do this, and the decision we have today is going to have this effect down the road. They're telling a story, and one of their opponents who disagrees with them says, oh no, this did happen, but it happened for a completely different cause.
Yeah.
And if we do the thing that you want to do, I'm going to tell a story about how everything just completely falls apart.
Yeah.
Like,
and now you're introducing the archetype of the villains.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and this is, what are you going to do with an English degree? Well, you're going to get better at this fundamental human activity,
right,
which when you start, if you're able to conceive of it in all these other ways, like it starts popping up everywhere.
It does.
It
does.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that even though it might be dying, I love Twitter, because when I'm on something like Twitter or social media, first of all, every little piece that I see, and I don't know Snapchat, I'm not good at the way the youngs, my teens interact with like Twitter, what's that? But every story or every bit is the same size, right, as you're scrolling through. So I feel it's like, I don't want to say democratic, but it feels really sort of, like equalizing. But also I follow a lot of writers, I follow a lot of journalists, I follow a lot of people who are always saying, look at how a narrative is being framed. So I'm always aware of like, how is that story being told? And who's the winner in that story? And who's the loser in that story? Politics or health or whatever else you got.
Who isn't in that story at all?
Who isn't in that story, right? Yeah, absolutely.
We have about 5 more minutes left. There is one more question, if I can share it, and then see if what response back. If there's any other questions, please use the Q&A tab and put them in there. But it states, another tech-related question. Writing online is now for 2 audiences. 1, Google, if you want anyone to see your content, and 2, people, if you want your content to make a difference. Do you think this cheapens the writing in any way if we have to follow random algorithms versus writing according to our aesthetic? Does it foster creativity, or what do you think?
Jump in with one thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to jump over to a different realm. I'm not going to answer the social media thing because I don't know anything really like deeply, as I have just demonstrated. But when I had my first book come out, and it did really well. It got, well in terms of awards, right? So it got recognition, collects your short stories. I learned at that time, people already probably know this, that it got selected to be in a Barnes & Noble program. And I was like, great, but I also didn't understand what that meant. And so I learned that anytime you walk in a bookstore, every single thing you're going to look at and every single choice you're going to be able to make has been choreographed, paid for, and put together architecturally around what publishers are going to say what titles should be at the forefront, who their darlings are for that season or whatever. Every single time you walk into a place that even has old technology like books, has already been curated, designed for you to pick that book by Bill O'Reilly, Frankenstein is Dead, or whoever is killed, or The Killing of Lincoln, or whatever over here. everything's been predetermined even in other forms of consuming stories, libraries, the Dewey Decimal System, right? All of that stuff. So to me, it doesn't cheapen anything. It's just another taxonomy. It's just another system that puts weights and puts dollars behind representation the way that we've seen this for, think of any literary anthology and who has rights. I don't know, this is me, you guys are looking back, like someone's fighting. So to me, it doesn't feel new, I guess, if that's my answer. What about you all? Do you have strong opinions?
I don't have strong opinions, but I am feeling a connection between the Google issue, which I'm guessing comes down to things like SEO and search. Yeah, and you know, affinity engines are really, really interesting, but in my discipline of music, they're really not that great, because what you really have is, you know, a platform like Spotify that's continually trying to steer you towards other stuff. Customized
toward you.
Yeah.
Right. And they're geniuses at it. My goodness, the way my kids are like, oh, my top whatever of the year came out, and they can't wait to look at the mirror of their tastes, right?
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, I think that it just is one of the constraints that we kind of have to live with, you know, overall. It's another part of storytelling. You live within, as a storyteller, you live within the constraints of your medium. And if you're going to be putting it online, you have to live within the constraints of the narrative marketplace, really, in the way that those are being shared and searched through and put online. So I think it's just kind of an inevitable fact. So.
And I mean, salacious stuff, like I am going to click on the picture of so-and-so with their baby bump. This is who I am. It's like, oh, they're in a bikini and they lost weight. All right, click. Like I will make that dumb animal choice, right? And that is cheap. And that's just what I am interested in at the time. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go read something else or do something else or be better for my brain in some way.
Yeah, I mean, in so many long-term ways, we're still learning how to use the internet. You know, when you think about a similarly disruptive technology like the printing press, like you realize like the printing press is great once we figured out to use it, but it was 50 years of political chaos.
Oh, sure.
Because one of the first things people did with the printing press, the Catholic Church said, hey, we can print off a whole bunch of indulgences and use this to fuel a bunch of crusades. And so there were all of these hugely disruptive, like first generation uses of this new technology. And we're kind of like living through that on the internet right now. Like I would be I probably won't be able to, but I'd be very interested to look 50 or 100 years down the road and see how we were supposed to have been using the internet all this time.
The thing I love about it too is the cacophony. This is why I'm sad about Twitter potentially dying at any moment, is I accidentally stumbled upon so many lives and discussions and intellectual, you know, everything, people from all walks of life that I never would have found. But at the same time, you have counter narrative and counter technology coming from TikTok, from Snapchat, the young people out there that are like, and then, oh, that's so, you know, like this is an antiquated form. We don't communicate it this way anymore. And Instagram and all of these ways that, sure, but they're all competing. They're all different forms of story and different forms of content, maybe all cheap, what do I know, all coming at us at the same time. So I don't know, I kind of love that because again, like you can't rank an event. There are ways that things are being fed to you and ads are being fed to you and so forth. But by the same token, you are still able to move from platform to platform to, you know, shelf to shelf.
Right. We have one last question, or at least at this point. I know we only have about 2 minutes left here. It says, thank you, professors. Hi, Dr. Meacham. You may have noticed some peculiar qualities of storytelling in different parts of the world. What are the standout differences, say, for example, in Europe versus Asia?
Well, I'm gonna be a terrible answerer of this, but I'm gonna jump at it anyway. When we were earlier talking about, I can't remember what it was that we were saying, but I was thinking about, it had to do with consequence and plot and elements like that, and cause and effect. It reminded me of this great learning moment that I had, and this is a long time ago, and I'm sure thought has moved past this point, where I was in a class and we were reading a book called Black Elk Speaks. So this isn't global. This is just the United States. And in that book, the person who wrote it, whose name I'm going to blank out on, was transliterating, which is taking stories from the Native American group that he was with and then putting them into a book. But because he was a Western raised storyteller, he was looking for the conflict, the crisis, the resolution. So what you're reading is a Western narrative of how these stories were told. So to me, there's great richness even in different methods of storytelling, like what if you're conventionally minded think, well, that's digression, or this is just going around and around the same thing, or who cares how these people are related? Let's get to the real story here of sword fighting or what's going to happen. Those cultural differences are fascinating to me. So that's my non-answer to global, but my answer to local. Do you guys have some favorites in terms of international or global trends in storytelling? Okay.
Only insofar as like a native viewer or a native speaker's understanding of convention in a particular style can become really important.
Yeah.
You know, and that so much of, just like I said, like music is not a universal language. Like there are ways in which storytelling is universal, but you know, cultures build up so many structural conventions.
Yeah.
That, you know, once you become, if you're not versed in the structure, things aren't really going to make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not really answering. This is our way of using words that are really answering.
Well, we are right at 6 o'clock. I don't think there's any other questions. So any other final thoughts anybody you want to share?
Storytelling's awesome.
Do it.
There you go.
Well, thank you again, professors, for taking time to present for us this evening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please consider registering for future Phoenix forums. If you have any suggestions on topics that you'd like to see presented for future forums, or if you have any alumni needs, please feel free to email me. Again, I've given my email address out several times. You should have that from the meeting invite, or certainly at alumni at uwgb.edu. So thank you so much for attending this evening. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, you all.